Hi, everybody. How's it going? Hope you are all well. Okay, before we start, I just want to say a couple of things regarding the paper that's also due this week, okay, due on Friday the 17th. You do not have to submit a hard copy, okay? If you downloaded or looked at the PDF file about the dance concert critique, which you should do, and follow those guidelines for your paper. But anyway, on that paper, it says to submit a hard copy, but you don't have to. Okay, that's taken from my face-to-face class once upon a time. Okay, the other thing is, yeah, don't forget about your paper. And guys, please pay attention to spelling and grammar because that's what this paper is all about, okay? Your opinions and everything else is yours and cannot be wrong, okay? But it's all about spelling and grammar. And you can look up, just Google dance performances, all right? And you can find videos or look at YouTube and find, New York City Ballet, modern dance companies. There are some videos there. And don't forget your own school. We have dance videos you can look at, or you can watch past concerts that we have done if you want, okay? All right, so today we're covering chapters 21 through 25, and I love these chapters. They're really good. And 21 introduces us to modern dance, and here's what happened. In the early 1900s, some dancers got sick of ballet, got sick of the strictness and the tradition and the unnaturalness of ballet, because ballet is very unnatural. And they wanted something different. So they broke away from ballet and they started trying to find what kind of movement made them feel good. Now, for some reason, the majority of these dancers were women. The early modern dance pioneers were women. And they did something I thought was very brilliant. They decided to, support one another and not reject each other's works. Like whatever style they came up with or what the way they liked to move was going to be very different than how the other choreographers like to move, right? And so they agreed to not reject one another the way ballet rejected them. With ballet, you have to take your unique body and try to fit it into this image that already exists, okay? Now, modern dance is totally opposite that. In fact, this is a key word to modern dance. Modern dance is about the individual, all right? Individuality is all over modern dance. So it's about the person who's creating it and their style, okay? Now, since we are all different and unique, it goes for, granted that we're going to have 100 million different modern dance styles, and we do. Okay, so modern dance is about the individual. They wanted to explore their own lives more and why they loved to move and what was in it for them and the ways that they liked to move. Okay, so very, very important. And of course, in the beginning, the ballet world rejected this new crazy modern world of dance. And originally also modern dance rejected ballet. Now, come to find out, there is a happy ending later on. They then see the value of incorporating one another's styles, okay? Now, today, that's absolutely true. If you're a dancer today, you absolutely must know ballet, modern. It helps if you have African training. It helps if you have Let's see, what are some other styles? Flamenco, folklorico. I mean, just every style, jazz, you can get your hands on. Dancers today should know and have at least had some practice in those other styles. All right, so let's see. Starting with modern dance, we have the time. Okay, we're in the turn of the century, the early 1900s, right? And you may have heard this before, but they have always said that during a turn of a century, for instance, 20 years before and 20 years after, or 10 years before, 10 years after. So let's say 1890 up until 1910. So you have 10 years before 1900, 10 years after. They say historically that there are always major breakthroughs in things and different things happening. Well, you can think of our turn of the century, the year 2000, and I can't believe that some of you might be actually too young to know this, but at any rate, the big change in our era was technology, you know, and some of you guys have been brought up with it since you were babies, but a lot of us have not. Okay, that was very new. All right, so in the early 1900s, what was happening was kind of a looseness in society. People were, you know, throwing off these high corseted clothes and very stiff clothes and that kind of thing. And there emerged a lightness and an enlightenment just about different things. Now, we already had other artists. Before dancers did this, we had other artists doing this. For instance, in classical music, we had Ravel, we had Stravinsky, we had Debussy, and in artists, we had Cezanne, you know, Picasso's about to come along, etc. So just breaking out of the structure of traditional art. And that's what dance was now doing with this new modern dance. So the name is still the same today, not to be confused with contemporary dance, okay? Some places call modern dance contemporary dance, and that's fine, but it's not something different. It's the same thing, okay? And the reason it's called modern dance is because it is about the individual. And of course, the individuals are going to change. You know, people grow old and die. And so we have new modern choreographers, but they are still doing new kind of modern stuff. So modern dance has always been changing and probably always will. So let's see. The art form is now following in line with other art forms that have broken those traditional barriers, all right? So how is modern different than ballet? Well, we have 6 elements that can show you that, and I'll explain them one by one. The first and most important element of modern dance is movement of the middle body. And what I mean by that is the torso, okay, the whole torso. In classical ballet, you are always upright, and, you know, ballet dancers do arch back and stuff, but they never tilt side, they never go upside down, you know, they never move their, you know, their middle torso. It's always held very rigid and straight unless they're arching, okay? So that's the biggest thing you can see. Because you're going to see some modern dances that look very much like ballet, but you know that they're not classical ballet, they're modern ballet because of the middle torso movement, okay? Breaking that tradition. And another one, this goes for the early modern dance pioneers. They threw away everything, bare slippers, point shoes, everything. They danced in bare feet. They wanted to be as natural as they could. Now, modern dance today has evolved beyond that. Some modern dances you will see have bare feet, And some might have army boots, some might have jazz shoes. Some modern ballet is actually done on point. So it depends on what the choreographer sees and visualizes with his or her dance, okay? Now, the third element is free, let's see, how can I explain this one? Kind of free movement of the whole body. So free swinging movement of the whole body. Now, ballet looks very free swinging, but it is not. It is extremely controlled. You know, you shouldn't see it. It should look easy and free swinging, but that's what's so hard about ballet. It's very controlled every minute, every moment of it. Modern dancers said they wanted it looser. They wanted it more free. You know, if they were going to do a third arabesque, instead of exactly there where we are trained, it might be there or wider. You know what I mean? They wanted a looseness to it. Okay. Now, the next element is they really wanted to use the space as three-dimensional as opposed to two-dimensional, all right? So classical ballet is facing front all the time. You very rarely see the dancers' backs. And remember Pierre Beauchamp with King Louis XIV, and he created all these rules. And, you know, it's just forward and two-dimensional, and that's it. Now, even if the ballet dancers are running to the back of the stage, they can't just turn their backs and go. They have to run by still continuing to look at the audience, okay? So that's something modern dancers wanted. They wanted, you know, use of three-dimensional stage in real life. So if they wanted to choreograph a modern dance in which the dance started with the back facing the audience, you know, total back, well, then that was okay. They didn't want any of those rules, okay? So they used space as three-dimensional, okay? Now, the next one is they wanted natural expression of feelings and ideas. They wanted them to be expressed naturally. That's what modern dance is all about, natural, okay? And if you watched the ballet Giselle, which I hope you did, you can see that when Giselle is picking the petals off the daisy, he loves me not, he loves me. Well, she gets to the last one, and she thinks it's the last one, and it's going to say, he loves me not. And so she doesn't want to pull it. And so what she does is go, oh, no. And she puts her hand on her forehead and shakes her head and like, no. But she's not going, no, get out of here. You know, she's not loose. She's all lifted, and her head is lifted up when she says no. So there's a style of expressions in classical ballet that you have to learn. They're not natural, okay? And so modern dancers, you know, if they were deeply sad and something happened that was horrible and horrendous, they wanted the freedom to react like this. Oh, no. They wanted the freedom to react naturally, okay? All right, so natural expression of ideas and feelings, okay? Now, the last one, in our book, actually, the author only puts 5, but I think this last one is necessary, and it is floor work. Ballet dancers are very rarely on the floor, and they never dance while on the floor. A ballet dancer might go to their knee, but even when they go to their knee, you know, they're not just going down like that. They're lifting higher and higher and higher and higher as they go down onto one knee. And that is the ideal of ballet always lifting up, up, up. They're not in reality kind of thing. And so modern dancers use the floor. They don't always use the floor, but they wanted the right to do that. And some choreographers did use the floor a lot, okay? So in modern dance, today especially, anything goes. It's what the choreographer wants. But as I said initially, the easiest way to spot a modern dance is by the movement of the middle body, okay? That's the biggest and easiest one. All right, so individuality is a key word, okay, for modern dance. And we do have a few choreographers who developed their own style and started a school. And because of that, their technical style of dance has been saved. And for instance, Martha Graham Dance Company, that company still exists in New York, and dance teachers there have to teach the Graham technique. They are not allowed to teach their own way or any other way. Now, for most modern teachers and choreographers, here's what they do. We, of course, incorporate their own training. So, for instance, my training would be classical ballet. Then it would be modern dance with Merce Cunningham style, and then also Jose Limon style. So I have all that in me, and it's not like a mental choice, like, okay, I'm deciding to pull out some of my Merce Cunningham movement. It's not like that. You just play around and improvise, and it comes out. Stuff comes out that you've done and have been exposed to. And then on top of that, what comes out is my style of movement. Now, at the beginning, I don't know what my style of movement is about. That's what this deep modern choreography leads you to. So you can say I'm a mixture of all these different styles plus my own, but you don't really develop your own until after many years of working, okay? And another thing that happens with modern choreographers that you're going to see over and over is a path leading to spirituality. When you are just exploring and playing and improvising on your own and just kind of dancing, some days you might get a lot of steps or material that you like, and some days you might get nothing that you like. And that's kind of how it goes. Like dancers have writer's block too, but it's with dance blocks. And, today everything is kind of put together and merged. Now, some of my students, if they go on to become, a modern teacher or dance teacher of whatever kind, they will have their other training plus my training that I gave to them, plus their own that they found, So modern dance is always evolving. It's always changing because modern choreographers explore themselves and, you get into philosophy. Who am I? Why am I here? Why am I so drawn to dance? What am I supposed to do in this world, And it quite often leads to spirituality. It's amazing. We'll see that in some of these examples that I talk about and show you. Okay, let's see. So almost all of them were women. Now, as I said earlier, originally the two worlds did not like each other. Ballet didn't like modern, modern didn't like ballet. However, eventually they accepted one another's styles and discovered that if you are a ballet dancer, modern dance is going to help you be a better ballet dancer. And if you are a modern dancer, ballet is going to help you become a better modern dancer. All right. I remember I've had a few students who have had just classical ballet. And so when they took my modern dance class, it was very hard for them to tilt the body, to move the whole thing. I mean, if I did a step where they were supposed to tilt, they might go like this. You know, they would take their body but not their head. Or they might go like this, take their head and not their body. So, because they were so used to that upright back. And it just gives you more awareness of your body, and you're aware of every part of your body down to your pinky fingernail. Okay, so both have accepted one another. All right, in the early 1900s, there was a man whose name was Émile Jacques Delcroze, and he was French. And the reason he's important is because he created a physical way to teach dancers how to count music, right? So, you know, dancers didn't have to have all this music training and know what a quarter note looked like and a half note, et cetera, et cetera. So he would teach them this through physical methods of walking, all right? So let's say, pretend these are my feet, all right? And let's say I asked you to take 8 steps across the room. So you're going to go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then I'll say, all right, take 4 steps only, but with 8 counts. So then you would find yourself doing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And you would immediately see that that's slower. That's half the time as the step on every count was, okay? And then they might say something like, all right, take 16 steps with only 8 counts. And then you would find yourself going 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and 7 and 8 and 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 and 13, 14, 15, 16, right? So they would see that that's faster and that's double time, okay? And they might do some tricky ones like take 3 steps per count for 8 counts. So you would find yourself doing 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and et cetera, et cetera. Okay. So Delcroze, his method, physical method of teaching music to dancers became very famous and is called rhythmic analysis. Okay, rhythmic analysis. Now, that's not really taught so much anymore, but it was a big help to dancers of that time period. Okay, on to, oh my God, I wish I had met her. On to Isadora Duncan. Oh, you guys, this lady. Talk about a life with crazy ups and crazy downs, ups and downs. She never had like a balanced, even life. Her life was crazy. All right, so she is known as the mother of modern dance, and she was born in San Francisco in America. Now, they had 4 kids, 2 boys and 2 girls, and Isadora was the youngest of the 4 kids, all right? Excuse me. And her mother was very liberal and free, and she was actually a pianist also and played a musician. And she taught all the kids music and encouraged them to take dancing, et cetera, et cetera. But I have to tell you, Isadora Duncan never met her father because when her mother was pregnant with her, the father was some kind of banker and he got in trouble. And he got in trouble with the bank. I don't know what he did, but something illegal. And so he took off before Isadora Duncan was even born, so she never knew her father. All right, so her mother puts her in ballet classes, and she loves dancing, but she soon rejects classical ballet because of its structure. Oh, you guys, it's so hard to explain if you've never done it. But I can kind of give you an example. All right, let's say there's an arm position in classical ballet called second position, and it looks like this. All right, now let me give you an exercise in how to reach that position. So hold your arms out to the side, palms face down. Maybe I'll move back a little bit. Yeah. Now, the first thing you're going to do, and copy me, you're going to go shoulders up and down, shoulders down. Now, I don't mean just drop them naturally, but push them down. And shoulders down, shoulders down. All right, keep your shoulders down. Now, lift the elbows slightly. Elbows up, elbows up. Now, when you do this, don't lift your shoulders and elbows up. So check yourself. Your shoulders should still be down. Your elbows are slightly up. Now you're going to turn your hands so the palms face each other. So you have lift and lift. Now, this is where people will usually drop the elbow. Don't do that. Lift the palms and lift. Now, hold those shoulders down. Lift those elbows up. Turn those palms in toward each other. Can you feel those muscles working? Yeah? And relax. All right, so that's simply second position. Now, we build muscle memory, and eventually you just go to that position. You don't have to think all the time, shoulders, elbows, blah, blah, blah. But in the beginning, you do. But that's how controlled ballet is, and every step in it has that kind of control and isometric feeling, okay? And modern is very different. So Isadora Duncan's mother knew that she loved dance because she was always dancing around the house. So her mother said, okay, you can quit ballet, but I thought you loved dancing. What are you going to do? And she said, yes, I'm going to make my own dances. And so her mother said, okay. So she started making her own dances, and they were actually very beautiful. And she loved classical music, so she would dance to classical music. She especially loved Chopin. And Isadora Duncan loved nature, and she would often be inspired by nature. So, for instance, at one time when she had her school and she was teaching these little kids, she would say, okay, everybody, let's pretend that we are weeping willow trees, and we weep to and fro, et cetera, et cetera. And she would do things like, all right, imagine that you're a wave and you're building, 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 and then you splash on the ocean, on the sand. And, so she loved nature and often copied it. And her dancing was also very uplifting, but not like strict ballet uplifting, but just feelings of happiness and nature and prettiness, All right, so at any rate, her mother, her whole family was actually ahead of their time, big time. And her mother was very free and spoke to her children about the human body and to never be embarrassed about it. And they saw one another nude, okay? And when Isadora Duncan became a teenager and she started putting on shows in her backyard and inviting neighbors to see it, she would often have a costume that she made that by society back then would have been considered inappropriate, okay? So she might have like a chiffon costume that might have covered only one breast and the other breast would be bare, et cetera, et cetera. She would dance with bare feet. She would not wear tights or long socks or whatever they wore back then, okay? And a lot of people thought it was scandalous, but her works were really quite beautiful. So a couple of years later, her mother had this idea of going to Europe because they were more free thinking about the human body, etc. Best thing she ever could have done. So Isadora and one of her brothers and her mother go all over Europe, and they become a sensation, especially in France. Those people adored her. They wanted to adopt her. And you know what she said? She said, Well, I would love to be a stepdaughter of yours, but I was born in America and I'll always be an American, which is kind of cool. All right, so at any rate, she goes to Europe, makes all this money, tons of money, and word spreads about this new dance artist, et cetera, et cetera. And then she came home and she started a school, et cetera, et cetera. But every time she needs money, she has to go back to Europe. And every couple of years, she would try to put on a dance concert of her own works in America. And every time she did, they busted her down. You know, she did, I don't know if I want to tell you this yet because it's attached to something else. But okay, I'll tell you the story about Russia. She went to visit Russia and she couldn't believe how hard the people worked and how wonderful and kind and loving the people were. Because, you know, she had always heard, like the rest of us Americans, from our government, how Russians are bad and they're evil and blah, 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 blah. And she saw that that was not true. Now, the government might be evil, but the Russian people were just like us. They were very hardworking. You know, they wanted to live a good life. And she was amazed at this. So when she came home, she choreographed a dance, and the dance was honoring the people of Russia and how loving and kind they were. And the dance also was honoring American people and how kind and loving they were. And she was trying to show that we're all the same, you know. And she had a Russian flag and an American flag in the backdrop. And when she danced this piece, she got arrested and was called a traitor, and she was taken to jail. You know, it was just never ending with her. It was always something that society didn't approve of. And so she became known as the infamous Isadora Duncan in America. But the rest of the Western world adored her. She went to Greece. She went to Italy, Spain. She loved Greek art. She loved the simple lines. And in fact, she often took on the look of a Grecian tunic for some of her costumes, you know. All right, so this was her life. She had to keep going back and forth, back and forth. And one day she came home early only to find that the people running her school had put up a bunch of different signs on, you know, lunches at this time, and if you don't come, you will not get lunch, and blah, 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 blah. And Isadora Duncan wanted to run a very free school, the way she was brought up. And you eat when you want to eat, and you go to sleep when you want to go to sleep, okay? So she was so mad about this that she immediately closed down the school. And she called every one of the parents of the children, because it was a boarding school, and she said, come and pick up your child. My school is now closed. All right, so she closed her school. Now, Isadora Duncan swore she would never get married. In fact, what she said was, married? Oh my God, would you just look at all the beautiful men in this world? Just look. And you want me to experience just one of them? And you want me to spend the rest of my life with just one man? And, you know, she wasn't very conventional. And so she swore she would never get married. And she continued choreographing her works and touring, et cetera, et cetera. And one day she went back to Russia and she met an artist there, another artist who was a poet. And she couldn't speak Russian, he couldn't speak English, but their eyes met across the room. And they actually became lovers. And she fell deeply in love with him. And he asked her to marry him, and she said yes. You know, going against her own grain. But listen to what happened. A couple weeks later, after her Russian tour, she started packing her bags and going on to the next country. And her husband said, what are you doing? And she said, well, I'm getting ready for my next tour. I'm going to France. And he said, no, you are not. No wife of mine is going to travel around and show her body to other people. So she immediately got divorced and said never again. And she never did again marry. She did, however, have 2 children and a little girl and a little boy. And they were from different boyfriends. She was not married. But get this, at one period in her life, she lived way up on the top of a hill, and she was one of the first Americans to own an automobile, a car. And so at one time, her household was herself, her 2 kids, and the father of the girl and the father of the boy. And they all got along and they lived together. So very unconventional family. All right, so now she continues touring. Everybody else in the world is raving about her, but Americans still are not accepting her. Our own American daughter not accepting her work, still so unconscious about awareness and bodies, etc., and the beauty of the human body. So she did what she could. Now, there was another time in her life where she was going to take her kids on a picnic, and she was in the kitchen making sandwiches, and the kids are all running around, and she said, okay, you guys, that's it. Go out and play until I'm done. And so they went out to play, and she finished the sandwiches, and she took her picnic basket and went outside, and she immediately noticed the car was gone. And she dropped everything and started to yell for her kids. And she ran down the hill following the tracks. And at the bottom of the hill, there was a lake. And she could see the tracks go right into the lake. And she immediately dove in, and she was able to bring her children back up. But they both died. They both drowned. Oh, I get goosebumps every time I tell that story. I just can't even imagine, So what happened was one of the kids unknowingly, let go of the emergency brake or undid it somehow. And the car just rolled backwards down the hill, gaining speed, and it went right into the water. So needless to say, Isadora Duncan went into a deep, deep, deep depression. And, she wouldn't get out of bed. She wouldn't dance, do any of her choreography, called off all her tours. And her mother at one point came over and said, look, dance has always been in your life, and you have always healed yourself through dance. So you are going to that dance studio today. Even if you just get to the front door and come back home, that's fine. But you are going to make an effort to get to that dance studio. And so her mother helped her get dressed and walked her to the dance studio. The next day, she made her do it again. And this time they go in and, excuse me, each day she gets a little bit further in, and finally she starts working again. So what did she do? She choreographed a beautiful dance about children and what it's like to have a child and how exuberant it is and how loving it is. All right, so when she finished choreographing that dance, she decided to show it to the public. And she went over Europe with it, and they exclaimed it was a great masterpiece, et cetera, et cetera. She came back home to San Francisco, and she performed it. And there was a part where she was like lying sideways on the stage, and she was on the floor. And she had a big pillow under her stomach, showing that she was pregnant. And she was dancing the part of birthing her child. Now, you couldn't see anything. She had her knees up, but you couldn't see anything. And when finally she showed that she had given birth, she had a doll on the inside of her, and she picked the doll up like it was the young baby. And she held it close to her, and she rocked it, and she got up and started dancing with it. And she got arrested for what they called indecent exposure because of showing where a baby comes from and for having bare legs and see-through costumes. So she just couldn't win in America. She was, oh, you know what? Oh, I just had this thought that grossed me out. Even if she lived today, she would be considered way ahead of her time and inappropriate. When are we going to get out of this, guys? Oh my God. That's true. That's really sad. All right, so she kept going back and forth to Europe, back and forth, back and forth. And she went to France at one time. And remember, the French adored her. They loved her. And they had a party for her celebrating after her performance. And she met a man there, and they started talking. And he said, well, I hear you're one of the first Americans to have a car. And I have a car too. And she said, oh, you do? What kind is it? And so he said, well, it's what's called a sports car, and it's red and it's beautiful. And she said, oh, can I see it? And so they went downstairs and he brought it out and he said, come on in, I'll give you a ride. And she said, okay. And it was just a perfect day. It was early spring, warm weather just starting. She had on a beautiful flowered dress and a scarf that matched it. And so they're driving down the Champs-Élysées, which has no speed limit, and it has no top. He's got the top down. I didn't even know old cars could do that, but in Europe they could. So she's standing up in the front seat holding onto the windshield, and she's going, faster, faster. And so he goes faster and faster. And she says, faster and faster. So he keeps going faster and faster. And what happens? The scarf that she was wearing, this long scarf, got caught on the hubcap of the tire, and it immediately breaks her neck and she dies. Now, I don't know if you guys are laughing because I don't know, whenever I tell this story face-to-face in class, they laugh. Maybe it's because they didn't expect it, or it was just such a surprise. I don't know, but they laugh at that. And of course, they recognize it's a disaster and a horrible thing. So at any rate, that's how Isadora Duncan died. And, France was beside itself. In fact, to this day, France has a day of celebration that is called Isadora Duncan Dance Day. That's how much they loved her. And they still celebrate her today. And the whole European nation was just devastated. What happened back in America? Well, a teeny little paragraph announced that the infamous Isadora Duncan died in Europe in a car accident. And that was it. That's all they said. That was it. Okay, so let's pass through time. And this was in the 1980s. For me, I was dancing in San Francisco with this Margaret Jenkins Dance Company. And I was looking through the newspaper. And I saw this whole page article on Isadora Duncan. And the writer was a dance critic, and he wrote the most beautiful full-page article on her. And it was all these wonderful things that she did. And at the end, he said, Isadora, our very own child in San Francisco, our daughter, will you accept our apologies for not claiming you a great dancer and for insisting that you were inappropriate when you were just the eye of beauty. and oh my God, this article just went on, and I was in tears. I was in tears by the end of it. It was incredible. It was just like finally someone recognizing her, Well, the modern world did recognize her, but predominantly in Europe. All right. Now, I have to say something right here. You guys have maybe heard this. When an idea is about to come into a person's mind, it doesn't necessarily come to just one person. Okay, let me give you an example. For example, we're taught that Benjamin Franklin discovered electricity through flying a kite, et cetera, et cetera. And at the same time period, there were others in Europe who were discovering the exact same thing at the exact same time? Well, that's very true. Okay, so the reason I'm saying this is because while Isadora Duncan was here in America, creating this new path of natural dance and calling it modern dance, there was also someone in Germany doing the same thing. And her name was Mary Wigman. Okay, and I'll talk about her a little bit later when we take a little German detour. But at any rate, of course, their styles were different because modern dance is about the individual making it, right? And as I said, Isadora's style was very up and often trying to imitate nature. And Mary Wigman's style was very dark and heavy and brooding and, just totally opposite. All right, let me just take a peek and make sure I didn't forget anything about our Isadora. Okay, 2 children, etc. Oh yeah, here's her connection. Here's what she wrote. She said, I envision future dancers, body and soul, in harmony, and natural language of the soul will be the music of the body. Dancers will not belong to one country or one nation. Dancers will belong to all humanity. So what she was saying was, I may have been born in America, but these people in these other countries are just like me. I'm just like them. We're all one. She was getting into metaphysics. Before metaphysicians even discovered it, she was realizing all these deep spiritual beliefs and peace and love, etc., etc. Oh, I just got goosebumps again. But oh my gosh, quite a lady, that Isadora, quite a lady. Okay, so early modern dancers were stepping out of tradition, okay, with a sense of freedom in their dance. And she said also that, when a big change comes or change something, usually at the beginning, humans don't like changes because we usually fear them. However, if you look back in your life too, on a big change that happened, you will see how good that change was in your life and how it opened you up. Change always means growth. I mean, if you were born in one little town and lived there your whole life and died there, you would not have had the experience of other countries, and you wouldn't have been able to grow through other traditions and cultures, et cetera, et cetera. So big changes always mean some kind of growth, and growth leads you to unlimited possibilities, more things than you would ever even think of because of what this change led you to, okay? And unlimited possibilities bring us closer to the human spirit, okay? So it's all connected in there, just quite amazing. All right, that was chapter 21. The others aren't so long. Chapter 22 is about Ruth St. Denis, originally known as Ruthie Dennis. And she was, let me see, 1880. So she was just few years older than Isadora. And she was born in New Jersey. And she had a similar experience. She studied ballet in her childhood. And she liked ballet, but she liked other forms of dance too. So she studied Broadway dance, what we would call vaudeville back then, the little jazz that was around. And she actually had a good singing voice. So she was what we called a triple threat. She could act and sing and dance. All right, so Ruthie Dennis was actually working as a dance hall girl, and she met a friend, and they went to this soda fountain. We don't really have them anymore today, but they used to have soda fountains where, you know, it was a counter with stools, and you could go in and sit down and order lunch or desserts. They were famous for ice cream and desserts, et cetera, et cetera. Soda, let's see, what do they call ice cream soda or a frap or a milkshake, that kind of stuff. So she was sitting there with her friend, and she saw this poster on the wall. And this poster was of the famous Egyptian goddess Isis. You girls may have heard of Isis, the famous Egyptian goddess. Now, if you look back from chapter 4, remember Isis was Osiris's sister that he married, and she brought the arts to her culture. Okay, so she's staring at this poster, and it was a picture of Isis, and she was holding a cigarette. Like the poster was to try and sell Egyptian cigarettes. And Ruth St. Denis was just mesmerized by this poster. So much so that later on, when they got back home, she asked her friend if she would go back down to the soda fountain and ask the guy if she could buy that poster. And she, you know, paid a large amount for it. And he said yes. So she became mesmerized this. She found out it was Isis and selling Egyptian cigarettes. And so she started researching Egypt and how those people ate and what they ate and how they worked and what they did and their music and their dance, etc. And of course, back then, because of our anthropologists, there wasn't much material. You know, there weren't videos or movies on Egyptian dance, but you could occasionally see blurbs of it with, there were some famous movies that used to, like in the 40s, 30s and 40s, that Hollywood did. And sometimes it might be about Cleopatra or something like that. So they might have like all these Egyptian dancers, you know, moving in the way that they thought Egyptian dance moved. And these were choreographed, by the way, by Ruth St. Denis, and she became famous. So she became obsessed with this Egyptian culture, eventually leading her into researching Hinduism. And she believed that she was reincarnated and that one of her lifetimes was in Egypt. Because every time she would research new things, it felt familiar. And some of these things she even knew before, like let's say the name of a food, and they would describe it and then say they called it and she would know it in her mind. And she felt a deep, deep, deep connection with Egyptian everything. And so she left her dance hall life, and she started choreographing these dances. And the dances definitely had an Eastern flavor. Now, today we would say Asian, but back then they called that continent the Orient, okay? And so her dances were called Oriental dances, and because they came from the East. And listen to some of the titles of her dances. One was called Incense, another was called The Cobra, another was called Radha, an Indian name. So she was choreographing these dances, these Oriental dances, and people were loving it. They were very exotic and very, the regular Tom, Dick, and Harry back then had never seen these exotic dances. And so she became very famous and continued to choreograph these dances. Now, her style of choreography has a name, and Ruth St. Denis' style name of her choreography is called Sacred Dance. Okay, that's what they call her style. All right, so she eventually hired some dancers and choreographed more and more work, and she traveled nationally, and she became famous. And there was one period where she wanted to hire male dancers because she could tell stories better with male dancers too, not just female. So let me just make sure I'm not skipping something and jumping the gun. Okay, so Europe loved her too, but she was always afraid of traveling to what she called the Orient because hi, Banj, what are you doing? Arlene's working, okay? Come on. Ugh. Okay, you guys, I gotta go get them a treat. I'll be right back, okay? Okay. Okay, so she was looking for men to hire into her dance company. And there was a dancer whose name was Ted Shawn. And actually, Ted Shawn started dancing as a child due to some kind of illness he had that could paralyze his muscles. So he grew up to be a ballet dancer and a ballroom dancer. So he saw Ruth St. Denis Company perform, and he immediately wanted to study with her, and she ended up hiring him as one of her dancers. Well, long story short, they ended up loving one another, and they got married, and they started a school in Los Angeles. Originally, all this was called the Ruth St. Denis School and the Ruth St. Denis Dance Company, okay? Now, Ted Shawn stayed with her for about 11 years, and eventually he kind of grew tired of her style of sacred dance, and he wanted to choreograph some things too. And so she let him, but she said, it needs to be in my sacred style, okay? And so he did, but he kind of grew tired of that. And they started arguing, and a lot of it was over whose name is on the box office first and that kind of stuff. And Ted Shawn wanted to name the dance company the Shawn and Denis Dance Company, because he was choreographing, he was teaching students, performing. He was doing everything. She was too. But she started it and started from scrap. So initially she said, oh, I don't think so, blah, blah, blah. So then they started a school in LA, and he said the same thing about the school. And so she finally gave in and named the school the Denis Shawn School of Dance. So both of their last names, Ruth St. Denis and Ted Shawn. So the Denis Shawn School of Dance. And then they ended up naming their company that as well, because, she wanted people to connect the two together. So she trained dancers at her school. All right, so now what's happening is Ted Shawn and Ruth St. Denis are not really getting along all that well. However, among their dancers are 3 dancers that went on to become very famous in their own right. And I'm going to talk about them later, but I'll tell you their names now. Martha Graham, Doris Humphrey, and Charles Weidman. Okay, so here's what happened. At one point in time, Ruth St. Denis and Ted Shawn got the company together and said, we need more money because we want to open a school on the East Coast in New York and spread the style of sacred dance. And so they wanted their dancers to go dance at the Greenwich Follies and, vaudeville, and to earn a bunch of money and then come back to the company and give them the money so they could build this new school in New York. And do you believe that all but 3 dancers said, okay. So the 3 dancers were those that I just mentioned, and they left. They quit Ruth St. Denis Dance Company, et cetera, et cetera. All right, so on with Ted Shawn. Eventually, he decides, well, first, let me tell you, in all fairness to Ted Shawn, look at the time period they're in, the 1930s, 1940s. I mean, back then, Americans believed the man was the head of the household, the man was the boss, the man earned the money, blah, blah, blah. So it was really hard for Ted Shawn to be, a member of his wife's company, so that was hard for him too. Seeing what society was putting on him, that was very hard for him. So the change was good. Eventually they break up, and Ted Shawn decides to leave and go back to the East Coast. So he decides to drive, and he's, seeing the country as he drives across country. And he gets this idea, like he's very bothered that there aren't enough men in dance, and that in America, men in dance are viewed in this awful way, as something's wrong with them or something. So he got this idea. He stopped at a college in the Midwest and he spoke to by then I should tell you, Ted Sean's name was well known. He was known as a famous dancer. So he had an appointment with the president of the college and said, I would like to offer a 2-week workshop just for men, but not call it dance. I would like to call it something like physical stamina workshop for men or whatever. And back then, you guys, you had to take PE to graduate college. Of course, you don't anymore, but back then you had to. So, of course, people saw these flyers, and the men that hated PE were the first ones to sign up. And so they went through this 2-week workshop. And so Ted Sean had 5 different classes made up of men. And what he did not look like dance, because what he did was show them different steps. Like, for instance, scrimmaging. You know how they do in football? Like quickly moving your feet and your body back and forth. He would show them running, so like, okay, start with your right foot and run 3 steps. 1, 2, 3. And then put your right palm to the sky. Ah! And now he'd say, jump when you did that. 1, 2, 3, jump! And he just made up all these different movements with his different classes. At the end of the 2 weeks, they get together in the gym and they're showing like a lecture demonstration kind of thing. Now, the students didn't even know this, but they all get together and he just said, okay, when I blow my whistle, start doing what I taught you. And there was no sounds, no music, no nothing. So the group starts to move and intermingle what turns out to be a basketball game without a ball. But you could tell by the movements that they were doing. And I mean, he choreographed it so precisely that, one student would be running to, up to another. He didn't know there was going to be another person there till that night. And then at the last minute, the person moves away. And, it was just amazing. And the audience loved it. And so his lecture was all about how that was movement, and movement is dance. What you just saw was a dance, not a basketball game, but a dance. And so he decided to open America's eyes about men dancing and how it's very natural and very athletic and very wonderful. So he continued doing this across country, and there were some students that really got into it and they wanted to do it again. So he would say, well, my plan is to teach men dance. So when I settle down and get ready to do that, I will send you a telegram or call you and tell you. And if you still want to learn it, fine. So he developed, I think, 9 or 12 guys that wanted to continue doing this. So he's not quite to New York yet. He's driving through the Berkshire Mountains of Massachusetts, and the town is called Lee, Mass. And he saw this big old white farmhouse. A lot of it was broken down, and it had a barn beside it that was half broken down. And so just in the spur of the moment, he stopped, and there was a for sale sign out. And he asked how much it was, and he ended up buying that place. So he bought that place, and his idea was to start an all-male dance company. So Ted Sean started an all-male dance company, the first one in America anyway. So he phoned those students that said they were interested, and they ended up going. And he said to them, look, I have no money yet. I have a lot of things to teach you guys, and it's going to be a hard life. I mean, I spent all my money on this house and property in the barn, and we're going to have to grow our own food. we're going to have to fix up the barn and fix up the house, you know, and they still said yes, so they came. So he had 9 students that he trained and taught, and out of those 9 guys, only one of them had dance training. And they fixed up the barn first because he wanted a place to rehearse. But talk about a hard life. They were doing construction all day, and then dancing, and then doing gardening work, growing their own food, etc., etc. So eventually they had enough material to have a show, and they toured only nationally around America, and they drove there. Okay, they didn't have money to fly or anything. So it was a very, very hard life. And, you know, sometimes they might have a concert like in South Carolina. The next night it might be in Minneapolis, and they would have to drive all night and all day just to get there. So it was a pretty hard life. And they went on to do that for 7 years. And what started to happen was World War II came about. And of course, you know, all of the men, the majority of the men said, you know, I have to go home. I have to make sure my family's safe. And a lot of them wanted to enlist and go into the army. And Ted Shawn was too old to go into the army, so he wouldn't go in. So the guys all left, and his male dance company stopped. And he decided to open his place as a dance school. And he did that, and it became pretty popular. And what he started to do was dance companies that came on tour from Europe or other places, when they would go to New York or Boston, he would pay them money to come up to Lee, Massachusetts to teach a master class or do a performance, and they would. And he called his sanctuary there, he named it Jacob's Pillow. Okay. Now, Jacob's Pillow still exists today, and it's a big dance center, and it's more of like a university for dance majors. And boy, oh boy, if you go to that college, you can get training in every style of dance you can think of. You can, it's still very common for famous choreographers and teachers to go teach there and perform there, etc. So that was all Ted Shawn's doing, okay? Oh my gosh, what a life. Now, Ruth St. Dennis, her name was Ruthie Dennis, and she took the middle name Saint for her name. And she continued to go on touring quite successfully, et cetera, et cetera. And I have to tell you, there was one point when Ted Shawn was still with her, and he finally convinced her to go perform in what she called the Orient. So she did, and she was always afraid, because she was afraid they might say, who the hell do you think you are? You know, you're an American, you don't know our dance styles and blah, blah, blah. But that did not happen. They embraced her and they loved her. And of course, they already believed in reincarnation. And it was no surprise to them that she had once been an Egyptian and knew these dances, etc. So that was a big highlight in her life. All right, the end of this chapter. Go forward to Ted Shawn's Jacob Pillow. He's going to have his 50th anniversary of Jacob's Pillow. And so he calls up Ruth St. Dennis and said, now the two had not spoken and they were not friendly to each other. So he said to her, Ruthie, I would love it if you would come help me celebrate our 50th anniversary. You have guided me into modern dance and have taught me so much, et cetera, et cetera. And so she said, well, of course I will. So the weekend anniversary time period comes, and this man went to the airport to pick up Ruth St. Dennis. And as he was driving her back to Jacob's Pillow, she said to him, drive me to the theater. And he said, well, Madame, ma'am, you must be tired. Don't you want to go to your room? And she said, no, I have to tech my dance. And he said, what? And when you tech your dance, all that means is you have to go look at the space you're going to perform in. And you see how big it is or how small it is. And you must adjust your choreography. That's what that means, okay? So at any rate, he drove her to now she was in her 60s, her late 60s, and he drove her to the theater. And then he went and got Ted Shawn and said, Mr. Shawn, Ruth St. Denis thinks that she's going to perform. And he said, what? So he went over and talked to her, and, they embraced and all that. And he said, Ruthie, I don't expect you to perform. I just want you to enjoy yourself. And she said, oh, nonsense. I'm going to perform. So that weekend, the first night of performance, there were rumors all over the place that Ruth St. Denis was going to be there. And so Ted Shawn got up and spoke and said, let me squell those rumors. Yes, Ruth St. Denis is here. And there was a big yay in the audience. And then he said, let me also say that Ruth St. Denis is going to perform. And the audience just gasped because they knew she was older then. And so the guy, here he is helping Ruth St. Denis up on stage, and she's got a cane and she's like wobbling a little bit. And there's a stool in the middle of the stage, and she sits on the stool, and then all the lights go out, right? And a solo light comes up on Ruth St. Denis, and suddenly she's transformed into this little old lady, and she's just got this beautiful upper body, and her mannerisms are just exquisite. Now, she doesn't do any leaps or jumps or turns or anything like that, but her body and her style of sacred dance came out. And it was just beautiful and exquisite, and the audience went nuts. So at the end, someone in the audience said, how can you do that? I mean, we saw you walk up all hunched over, and how can you just transform into this beautiful dancer? And she said, well, I'll tell you, ask me to do it for 5 minutes, and I'm capable of doing that. But holding all that posture and the muscular movement you have to do, it's tiring, and I can't do it for as long as I used to be able to do it. So anyway, it was a success, and Ted Shawn was kind of upset because the next day there was a big review about the dance concert, and most of the review was about the great Ruth St. Denis and how she transformed from a little old lady into this beautiful, majestic dancer. And they did talk about Ted Shawn's anniversary too, but anyway. Okay, so that's the story of Ruth St. Denis, whose style was called sacred dance, and Ted Shawn, who started an all-male dance company. That was chapter 22. All right, let's see. Oh, I want to quote something Ruth St. Denis said, again, very spiritual. All phases of dance are the unfolding of the individual. Believe in the development of the human being and in the body of the instrument as the human spirit. So believe in the development of the human being and believe in the body as the instrument of the human spirit. All right. Oh my gosh. Okay. So that is chapter 22. Let's go on to chapter 23. And the title of this chapter is called German Detour. And I mentioned earlier that Mary Wigman was going away from ballet just like Isadora Duncan did. And we're going to see a few people in Germany that were starting to create modern dance themselves. So see, guys, it was like this idea that was ready to happen and move forward, but it came to more than one person, okay? All right, so we say that Americans discovered modern dance, but we also tell our students that Germany was starting to do the same thing, okay? So modern dance is a contribution of American dancers in the dance world, all right? And Germany also contributed a lot of modern dance, but Isadora was just a couple of years ahead of Mary Wigman. All right, German detour. Rudolf Laban. This guy, Laban, Laban, became, he was from a military family, and they used dance for their exercises to be strong. So he really got into dance. He became a dance teacher. And I have to tell you, his biggest contribution to the world of dance is something called Laban notation. Now, notation means to write something, to note, to take a note of something, right? And his last name is Laban. So he created this thing called Laban notation. And what it is it's a language really to write down dance steps so that no matter who interpreted it, they would interpret it in the exact same way. Now this, we had to take this in graduate school and I did not like it. It was really hard. They have all these symbols and stuff that stand for different parts of your body. And you might think, well, you only have 2 arms. How hard can it be? But you have 10 fingers, you have joints and knuckles in every one of those, just on and on and on. So anyway, he created this kind of graph that's vertical, not horizontal like a musical score, but vertical. And all these symbols that reflected parts of the body. Now, this was in the 30s, you guys. And to this day, nobody has yet created a way of writing steps down that when you studied that language, whoever was teaching it would interpret it the exact same way. Okay, so there's a big Laban notation building in New York City where they house all these famous works. And there are Laban notation teachers today, and they get paid quite well and get to travel the whole world. But anyway, like let's say a company, and it's not just ballet, it's jazz and modern and a lot of different works. Let's say a company in China wanted to, let's say it's a ballet company and they want to perform Petipa's Swan Lake. So they would call this Laban Notation Center and then they would say, okay, could you please send me the score? You have to pay a lot of money for the copyright fee. And they would say, please send me the score of Petipa's Swan Lake. And they would say, well, do you have anyone there that knows Laban notation so they can interpret the score? And if you didn't, you had to pay extra money to have a live person go with the score and literally teach the ballet, okay? And today there are a lot of Laban notation teachers still around. So that's still considered the most precise way to keep dance steps exactly as the choreographer wanted them. Interesting, huh? All right, so Rudolf Laban was also a dance teacher. And some of his students became quite famous. And let's see, Mary Wigman, because this is in Germany. So she studied with him, Mary Wigman. Kurt Jooss studied with him. We're going to talk about him in a second. So big things happening in Germany as well. All right, let's go to Kurt Jooss. And his name is spelled Kurtjooss. Okay, just like Yuri Killian with the J, this is Kurt Jooss. All right, so he was a modern dancer and choreographer, and his friend, whose name was Fritz Cohen, would often play the piano for his classes and for choreography. Well, one day, Fritz Cohen found out about a modern dance competition that was going to happen in Paris. And he encouraged Kurt Jooss to get into the competition. And so Kurt Jooss was kind of excited about it, and he looked into it more, only to find out that it was happening in 2 weeks, and they were not accepting any solos. It had to be a group dance. So Paris was now wanting to get in on the modern dance scene. So that's why they were having this competition. All right, so at the time, Kurt Jooss had been working on a solo of Death, and he himself was the character of Death. So he was working on that solo. But he thought he had to put it on the back burner because he had to have a group dance. And so he said to Fritz Cohen, 2 weeks, I'm never going to make it. We're never going to make it. It's too soon, and I don't have a big group dance. And Fritz Cohen said, come on, you can do it. You can do it. And he said, I'll do the music for it. So you guys, in just 2 weeks, he choreographed this dance that is called the Green Table. And it is known as the highlight of expressive modern dance. Just like Giselle is the highlight of romantic ballet, well, the Green Table is the highlight of expressive modern dance. And Fritz Cohen wrote the music in only 2 weeks. Oh my gosh. So I'm going to tell you quickly what it was about. You know, during this time, well, he choreographed it in 1932, but even though that was before World War II started, there were rumors going around about World War starting. There were rumors going around about this guy Hitler and how he hated the Jews, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So Kurt Jooss decided to choreograph a dance about the situation. In other words, you guys, we have to do something. What if war really happens? What are we going to do? And so the whole dance, called the Green Table, it starts out, the curtains open, and you see this long green table. And you see 5 diplomats on this side, and you see 5 diplomats on that side from all over the world. And this side is talking about how we have to do something. Hitler's getting out of control, and it's going to start a war. And this side is saying, don't be silly. Yeah, you're getting ahead of yourself. That's never going to happen. And so they're arguing about that, right? And that's the first little scene. And the second scene is introducing Death. So this is where Kurt Jooss takes his solo of Death he had been working on, and he incorporates it into the story dance, all right? And Dan's, he played Death, and he comes out as the character of Death and does all this kind of, he looks scary as all hell, and does this all hard movement. And the next scene is the farewells. Like, okay, what if war does happen, and now we have to say farewell to all our young men? They're going to be made to join the army whether they want to or not, and girlfriends are going to lose their boyfriends, mothers are going to lose their sons. So that was the farewell scene. The next scene is the battle, and they show armies battling each other in a dance way, etc. The next scene is all about the scavenger. And the scavenger is this character, this guy who creeps around, and he follows the fighting, and he follows Death. And whenever a soldier dies, he steals his money and his wallet and his shoes and everything that he thinks is useful. So that's the scavenger. Tippy, almost ready. It's not dinner time yet. Arlene's working, okay? Come on, Arlene's working. All right, so that was the scavenger. The next scene is about the refugees. All the refugees, with all the men gone, you know, the men aren't working. There's no money to buy food, and, you know, stores, everything's closing down. So all the refugees are starving and, you know, having a very hard life. Okay, after that is a scene called The Partisan, where this girl becomes courageous enough. She's in a red dress, and she decides to kill one of the enemies, and she does. And when she's killed, she's put in front of a firing squad, and she is herself killed, shot to death. And when this happens, the character of Death comes out, and we see a different side of him. You know, he's not harshly banging around and stuff, but he softly goes over to the girl and he picks her up and he cradles her in his arm, and he walks off stage with her. And he does the same thing too with one of the mothers of 3 of her sons were taken into the army and they ended up dying, and she just is devastated and doesn't want to live anymore. And he picks her up very softly and gently too, and holds her head close to his shoulder. And it gives you the idea that, you know, death is not always a bad thing for the person that died, you know? Like, she didn't want to live anymore, and she wanted to die and be with her sons. So very interesting viewpoint of death in this dance. Okay, now after the partisan who gets killed, the next scene is the brothel. And the brothel is one of the only things that's open. It's where soldiers go to drink at night and eat and dance with dance hall girls. And women, there's no other way to make money to feed your children. So a lot of them are working in this brothel and become prostitutes. And there's one scene with the soldier is dancing with this woman, and then when he's done, he throws her to this other soldier, and then this soldier dances, and this goes on and on and on. And finally, the woman is like a Raggedy Ann doll. She's so exhausted. And this other soldier dances with her, and he pulls her close to him like he's humping her. And eventually, this girl just drops and dies of exhaustion. And once again, Death comes out, and he kneels down on the floor and just caresses her body. And then he looks up at the audience like, do you want this to happen? You know, this could happen. Oh, okay. So then the next scene is the aftermath. And the aftermath shows all the people that have died because of Hitler, because of this war. And he starts them like in the upstage corner, and one at a time, they kind of walk this diagonal line. And when they get off stage, I swear they must run around and come on again, because it seems like that line is never ending. And there are children, there are soldiers, there are women, there are all people in this line that have died. Okay? So that's the aftermath of what could happen if war breaks out. So then the very last scene is once again the scene of the table, the green table. And again, you see the diplomats fighting. We have to stop him. No, that's never going to happen. You know, and going on and on. And at the end, one of the diplomats turns to the audience and goes like this. In other words, as if to say, well, what do you think? Do you think this is dangerous? Should we stop this guy? Oh my God. Well, needless to say, you guys, I'm going to attach it as something you can watch, okay? But needless to say, this dance, when it first ended, there was total silence. You could hear a pin drop. And Fritz Cohen and Kurt, you know, first they thought, maybe there are some German soldiers in the audience. Oh my God, I don't, you know, and they were getting very, very scared, and they decided to leave. So they were going to leave out the back door and get the heck out of there. And what happened was finally someone broke the silence, and it was this lone clapper like that. And others joined in, and faster and faster and faster and faster and faster, until the whole audience exploded with applause. this scene was so real to them that they initially couldn't even respond. And they saw this as a great, great work of art. So needless to say, the house manager ran out and called Kurt Jooss and Fritz Cohen back and said, listen, they love it. And needless to say, they won that contest. They won. And this dance, they still do this dance today. It's incredible. And you know what happened? After that dance, and before the next dance showed, a lot of the audience went home. They left. They got out of there. That dance scared them to hell, especially if they were Jews. And they got out of there. And so for the second half of the show, a lot of the audience was just gone. All right. So anyway, the dance is still done today the exact same way Kurt Jooss choreographed it. And any dance company who wants to do this dance must agree to have just the piano music playing. Even if they can afford a big orchestra, they are not allowed to use any other musical instrument except for the piano, because they want it to be presented in the exact same way it was presented in the Paris, what was it called? Competition. Or not competition, but just a showing of modern dance. But there was a winner with big money. So Fritz Cohen was Jewish. Kurt Jooss was Jewish. And they actually found a lot of Jewish dancers to be in this piece because he had the idea that if all this was going to be true, at least it would be a way out of Germany for these dancers. So with the money, he split it up evenly among everybody, all the dancers and Fritz Cohen, and they all kind of went their separate ways. Fritz Cohen and Kurt Jooss went to England, where they continued dancing, etc. And of course, the war did break out. They were not killed. They lived through it. Mary Wigman lived through it. Oh, God, just incredible, incredible. All right, let's see. So that's the end of chapter 23, our German detour. Oh my God, these chapters. All right. So I love them, but they're they're fascinating and interesting what people are doing back then, but they're long and intricate. Chapter 24, we are going to meet Martha Graham, the great Martha Graham. Oh my God, where to start? Have you ever heard the expression, the squeaky wheel gets the grease? Well, this is Martha Graham, all right? Okay, so she was born in 1894, died in 1991. So she lived for 97 years, a long, long life. And she was born in Pennsylvania. And there were four girls in her family. And she was the oldest. And she always felt like her three younger sisters were very pretty, and she felt herself to be very homely looking, I don't know. Anyway, that's what she felt. And her father was this psychoanalyst guy. So one night, Martha Graham saw a poster of the Rue St. Denis Dance Company. They were going to perform. And she begged her parents to take her, which they did. And she immediately fell in love with it and wanted to dance. So they started her in a little bit of dancing. She was older. She started dancing older, like about 14 years old, 13 years old, something like that. And then later on, her father got transferred across the country to another job and ended up in LA. And Martha Graham was ecstatic because this is where Rue St. Denis's Sacred Dance School was. And she went and took dance lessons at the school, and she wanted to join that company. Now, Ted Shawn saw something very intense in Martha Graham, and he saw her work her ass off, and he saw her passion and her strictness on her dance and how hard she worked. And so he told Ruth St. Denis that he thought they should hire her. Ruth St. Denis wasn't so sure. She felt like she was rather plump for a dancer and that she was kind of homely looking and blah, 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 which is kind of mean when you think about it. But anyway, Ted Shawn convinced her, so they hired her. Now, all the dancers of Ruth St. Denis Dance Company had to also teach. They had to teach classes in the style of Ruth St. Denis sacred dance. So that meant Martha Graham had to teach too. Now, it turned out she was very intense and high-strung in her dance classes. And she was very strict, and she insisted that all the kids in her dance class, they had to treat dance like this sacred religion almost. And they had to treat the dance studio almost like a church. And she was really strict. If you were 1 minute late, the door was locked and you couldn't get in and take the class. And even though you might be dripping with sweat, if she felt you were not dancing hard enough, she would kick you out. And she told her students that they should not have boyfriends. There were certain things like horseback riding. They believed that you should not horseback ride if you were a dancer. And the reason is because when you horseback ride, your thighs turn in when you hold on to the horse. And in dance, everything is turned out. I mean, modern dance could do anything, but they also did a lot of turnout, but more natural, not quite so severe as ballet. All right, so she started lecturing the students saying, if you don't want to be a professional dancer, I don't want you in my class, and blah, 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 blah. And so some of the parents started to complain. So Ruth St. Denis and Ted Shawn took her aside, said, cut it out. This is not, your school. That is not how I teach my students. And it's a way we're making money. So cut it out. These kids do not have to grow up to be dancers if they don't want. And she lightened up a little bit. But then one day, there was a guy that came to play the piano for her class. And his name was Louis Horst. Horst. Louis Horst. Now, this guy was not just a musician. He was very knowledgeable in all art forms, especially this new modern art form that was happening all over the place, in music and literature and dance. And he was very knowledgeable. He had already been to Germany to see some famous modern dancers in modern dance. So he was very knowledgeable. And he also loved modern dance so much that he started a magazine that was just about modern dance. And that never existed before. Dance magazine is usually all about ballet. Well, today, I don't know, it has other styles too, but it's mostly about ballet. Okay, so Louis Horst saw this intensity in Martha Graham, and he thought it was brilliant. And he started to become her mentor, and she really looked up to him because he was very, very knowledgeable. And he started saying things to her like, you ought to go off on your own and find your own style of dancing and moving. And what do you like to do? You can't do sacred dance forever and blah, 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 blah. But anyway, so they became very, very close. And he started to mentor her on the side and encouraging her to do her own thing. Well, at one point, Martha Graham's father died. And so she had no choice. She had to go work in Greenwich Village Follies and become like a dance hall girl. And they called her the princess because when she went there and they hired her, she insisted on being having the lead role and she would say, I am an artist. I'm not just a dancer. And so she got treated better than the other girls, so they named her the princess. All right. So at any rate, she did earn a lot of money there, and she was able to send it back home to her mother and her three sisters. And at one point, the the Greenwich Follies was invaded, and the police came to arrest everybody. And there was no nudity, but they had these clantily scad costumes on, kind of like a one-piece bathing suit and headdresses and all that. And one cop started to arrest Martha Graham, and the other cop says, no, not her. And he said, why? And he said, well, because she's not a dancer. She's an artist. So back then when there was a wall between ballet and modern, they rejected each other and didn't like each other. And Martha Graham considered herself a modern dancer, but she thought dance hall girls, the way they danced, was beneath her, so all that kind of stuff. All right, so anyway, after her mother's okay again, she goes back to Denishon, and she's dancing with the company again. And at one point, in fact, I told you from the last chapter, Ruth St. Denis and Ted Shawn sit down the company and say, look, we need you guys to go dance at the Greenwich Follies and earn a ton of money and then give it back to us so we can build a building in New York. We can build another Denishon house and, teach a sacred dance style to Easterners. And all but 3 people said no. So those 3 people were Martha Graham and Doris Humphrey and Charles Weidman. But right now we're talking about Graham. All right, so Louis Horse says, okay, this is it. Oh, I have to tell you, I always feel bad like I'm spreading rumors, but, the author of our book is a professional dancer, and that's why I like her book, because she has all this gossipy stuff in it. But anyway, she said that Martha Graham and Louis Horse actually fell in love. And he was married, and she knew it. Martha Graham knew it, but she didn't let it bother her. So anyway, they were sometimes caught kissing in the hallway and stuff. And Ruth St. Denis put her foot down and said, you cannot preach to your students that they shouldn't even have a boyfriend. And then you're seen kissing in the hall to a married man, So anyway, Louis Horse said, now it's time for you to go off, find your own movement, and create your own works. So he said, you have to go to New York. New York is where modern is really rising up. There was more modern in New York than there was in LA at that time. So she said, okay. And as she went to New York, Louis Horse went with her. Now, he was still married, and he would travel back and forth from LA to New York to see how her work was coming and how she was doing, et cetera, et cetera. And I don't know if his wife knew it, but anyway. So the first job Martha Graham got was this place. It was a school called the Eastman School of Music. And it was a high school for high school kids that were majoring in music. But of course, music being an art form, they also taught dance. So they hired her to teach dance there. But she did not last long, and that was because she wouldn't do the teacher's work. It was like she refused to take attendance, refused to give tests and exams and stuff. And she said, look, if you want all those things done, then you hire me as secretary or an assistant. I am a dancer and an artist, and I don't do that. So they fired her. So she gets to New York, and she got a little place, like a loft, and she starts working on her movement. And, Martha Graham was a very strong personality. If she had an opinion about something, you did not negate that opinion or defy her or anything, especially if you were her student. And in fact, Louis Horse was really the only one who could say to her something like, no, that is not good. In fact, he did. At one time, she was working on something, and he said, "Let me see what you've got." And she showed him, and he said, "That is horrible. That's horrendous." And she said, "Louis, you are breaking my heart, and you are tearing out my soul." And she said, and he said, "Well, if I am, breaking your heart, maybe it's better that I'd have an early death than do something like that." And so I'm, paraphrasing. So he was the only one that could say, "Get back in there and create something decent, and you got more than that in you." So he continued mentoring her all this time. Finally, I have to tell you, 3 students from the Eastman School of Music quit high school and went with her. Okay, so they all lived together, and she worked out a style of her dance, and she created exercises to teach the students to better know how to do her style. Now, she was big with the back. The name of Martha Graham's dance style is called contract and release, and it's all about the back. In every one of her dances, you will see this happening. When the back contracts, it's like the back is shaped into a letter C, but without the shoulders up, so there's like a concave of the back. And when you release it, you're releasing that contraction, and you're coming out of that kind of C curve. So that back movement is all over her dances. And so they call her style contract and release. So she finally gets to the point where she has enough material to put on a little concert. And so she does. And it was just at the right place at the right time, because people were so hungry for modern dance. It would be like, 30 years ago, hip hop was all the rage, and dancers and students would drive really far distances to take a hip hop class, a place that had them, and that kind of thing. So serious modern dance at that time was all the rage. So people were going to any kind of modern dance performance they could find, and critics went too. And they actually gave her a great review. And so she started getting more and more students. She ended up buying a bigger loft, and she got space above Carnegie Hall, actually. She rented space up there. And I want to tell you her, where is it? Oh, yeah. I want to just give you a little about her style. Unlike Isadora Duncan, who is uplifting and kind of pretty dance, Martha Graham, not as bad as Mary Wigman, but she would choreograph things about jealousy and rage and death and anger. And her movement is very linear and sharp and slicing. I mean, it's really quite angular, except for this little time period when she got married and was very, very happy. Well, then some of her choreography is the most beautiful work. It's so fascinating, because modern choreographers is about the individual, right? So you don't know what you're going to choreograph, but whatever you're going through is going to come out, and that's what happens. So, but most of her choreography was very harsh. All right. Okay, so she develops a following, becomes really well known as a modern teacher. Oh, this new modern dance, she's really good. And she develops her own exercises, her own, she builds her own school. You guys, I'm working. What are you doing? You want to say hi? Come on. Oh, there's Tippy. See, say hi. Okay. All right, really quick, because I hope you guys aren't saying, "Come on, this is so long. Get back to it." I will. Here's banjo. Oh, see, here's banjo. See? Okay. All right, come on, let's go. Arlene's working. Come on. Come on, out, 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 out. Ramon, get the dogs, please. Okay, stay there. I should have done that in the first place, but it's so hot in here. Okay. So she becomes really popular. A lot of students are now going to her. And because she started a school and made up her own technique of meaning exercises, that's why her company still exists today. Okay, students from the school feed into the company. All right, so she's becoming well known. She eventually becomes famous, and she, like Ruth St. Denis, also wants to hire men, because right now all she has are women, and it's hard in this country because not many men dance. So she finally meets someone. Well, a similar thing happened. This guy saw her performance and went backstage immediately after and said he would like to, does she ever hire any men? He would like to do her works. He thought she was a phenomenal choreographer. And she said, well, and she auditioned him right then and there, and she could see that he was a trained, very good dancer. And she said, you're hired. So she hired him, and eventually more men. And his name was Eric Hawkins. Eric Hawkins, Hawkins. And he joined the company, and now she could choreograph like love stories and things like that. And she did. And eventually, yes, they became lovers. And eventually, yes, they got married. Okay. All right. So I'm hurrying as fast as I can, guys. Let's see. Eric Hawkins. Da, 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 da. Her father once taught her that movement doesn't lie. Body movement does not lie. So you can tell a lot about a person just from their body movement. So because of that, Martha Graham never held in her emotions. Like if she was like really angry and she would notice like her teeth clenching and her shoulders going up, and she would never suppress those emotions like we're supposed to do in society, etc. So she was a wildly emotional woman. She could yell, she could hit, she could, she was one of these people that controlled her environment everywhere she was. So, there was no room for anyone else if she was there. It was all about her, what she was saying, what she was doing. So she now becomes really famous. Her dances become famous. She goes to Europe, et cetera, et cetera. And Eric Hawkins, at one time, they were on a European tour. They were in Paris, and they were rehearsing, and Martha Graham blew out her knee. And so Eric said, there's no way we can possibly perform tonight. And she said, yes, we will. It'll be fine. And it was like swollen really big. And he said, there's no way. And so he went down and told the manager they had to cancel the performance. And she was so mad at him, she would not even talk to him all the way home, flying home and everything. All right, so her knee gets better. She goes on to perform and choreograph. She's got famous actors going to her they want her to teach them how to react physically to certain things, et cetera, et cetera. So things go on, and Eric Hawkins decides that he's had enough. She was so in love with him. She said that was the happiest time in her life. And her choreography while married to him was so different. And so, I love her other works too, but when she was in love, her work showed that, and they were very different movements. But anyway, Eric Hawkins wanted a divorce, and she was devastated. She did not see that coming. And he said, look, I'll hang around for a few weeks until you can find another male dancer to replace me. So the next day in rehearsal, she was just devastated. In rehearsal, she's dancing with him and she's like caressing his face and everything. And then he's hugging her. And she said, I can't stand this. If you're going to divorce me and you're going to leave, and I am so upset, I cannot pretend I'm in love with you in this dance. You have to go now, go now. So he said, okay, and he just left. But in all fairness to Eric Hawkins, he said that, it was tough with her because her personality, it was so controlling and it was always about her. And he had to see to it that this was ready for her and that was ready for her and all this kind of stuff. And, she didn't much take interest in what his ideas were, his feelings, et cetera, et cetera. And it was just too much. But I forgot to tell you one thing. At one point in time, before they got married, but when she fell in love with Eric Hawkins, she had a question, and usually she asked Louis Horst. But this time, Eric Hawkins was in the room too, and she said, Eric, what do you think of this idea? And she started to talk about a step. And Louis Horst said, excuse me, but why are you asking him? Aren't I your mentor? And she said, well, Louis, yes, but I want to see what Eric thinks about this too. And he said, well, you make up your mind. It's either me or him. And she said, well, Louis, I'm afraid I love Eric and he's going to be around for a while. And Louis Horst said, okay, that's it. And he quit on the spot after being her mentor for 22 years. Now, isn't it interesting that she never asked him to get divorced from his wife, but he can't stand it if she's liking another guy's. But anyway, so he left after 22 years and the two never really got back together. Kind of a sad ending. Okay, so now Martha Graham is household name, known all over the world, beautiful company, beautiful school. And she's continuing to play the lead in every one of her dances. So she always plays the lead role. Now, she has a kind of a committee, like a board of directors, basically. What board of directors do, they're people who like what you're doing and they want to support you in some way. So a board of directors will usually, guide you. They'll tell friends about you. They'll try to find money for you, that kind of thing. So her board of directors spoke to her at one point and said, Martha, we think that it's time that you start teaching the lead roles to some of the younger dancers. You're not going to be young forever. And what if something happens to you and you hurt yourself physically? And she was so mad. And she said, hell no, no one will ever dance my lead roles, blah, 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 blah. And she had some kind of temper tantrum and she just left. And so the board of directors, didn't mention it again for a while. Listen to this. Her last performance was in a dance she choreographed called Acrobats of the Gods. She was 74 years old. We have video of her dancing in a dance called Appalachian Springs, one of her most famous works. She was 65 years old playing the lead role. Okay, so this continued on. And, eventually the board of directors went to her again and said, this is it. You have to start teaching your roles to other dancers. So she did, and she didn't like it, but she did. And one night it was a dance that she choreographed and another girl was playing the lead role, a younger dancer. And she was sitting in the wings to watch the dance. And the girl came over to her and said, oh, Miss Graham, I have to tell you, I'm going to do my very, very best. And this is the happiest time of my life. And Martha Graham said to her, well, good for you. This is the worst time of my life. And she just threw her scarf on and left. So she could be crazy. And at one point there was, the curtain was just about to go up, and Martha Graham was in a real bad mood, and she was on stage yelling at the dancers. And, the tech people were saying, come on, we're going to start. And she wouldn't stop yelling at them. Finally, one of the dancers went and got Louis Horse. This is before he left her. And he came on stage, curtains closed, okay? And he went up to Martha and he goes, wham! And he smacked her right across the chops and said, stop it, you bitch. Excuse my language, but that's what he said. It's right in the video. And so she stopped it. He's the only one that could have stopped her back then. All right, so she has to stop dancing. She is extremely depressed. Now, you guys, this is a woman who is so, what's the word? She's so dedicated to her art form and her body. She did not have sugar for over 35 years. And I'm not kidding. I mean, she had fructose and fruit and stuff, but no candy, no ice cream, none of that. She didn't drink, she didn't smoke, none of that. And she became so depressed because she says in one of her biographies that along the road, she made a deal with her body. And that deal was, I will feed you nothing but the best nutritional food, and I will get you enough sleep, and I will treat you as best as I can. And in exchange, you will stay healthy and let me dance for as long as I want. So she had like this, I don't know, this bet with her body or something. And so when they didn't want her to perform anymore, she became very, very depressed. She stopped going to work and, rehearsing and stuff. And she started to drink. And she drank and drank and drank. And there was one point where she became a severe alcoholic, was no longer even working. And there was another dancer whose name is Agnes DeMille, and she was a friend of Martha Graham's, and she had been out of town. She saw a mutual friend and said, oh, how are you? How's Martha doing? And the friend said, oh my God, if you want to see Martha before she dies, you better hurry up and go see her. And she said, what's going on? So Agnes DeMille went to her apartment. She went in. There was no food in the refrigerator. There was barely any food anywhere. There was alcohol all over the place. And so Agnes DeMille called 5 other friends, and they took turns staying with Martha Graham until she was healthy. They threw all the alcohol away. They bathed her. They put her to bed. Someone was with her all the time, 24 hours a day. And they got her back to good health. And that's when she returned to work again at age 79, all right, and continued rehearsing her dances and choreographing, but she no longer performed. And she choreographed her last dance at 90 years old. 90 years old, guys. She choreographed her last work. All right, so all the dancers, while Martha was around, they were, very afraid of her because she was very controlling and demanding and stuff. And so when she died, no one even, Martha Graham had already said to a lot of people, when I die, I don't want a funeral, I don't want a mass, I don't want anything. You just leave me be. And so when she died, everyone was afraid to do something. Finally, about 2 weeks later, someone said, come on, let's put on a night celebrating and honoring Martha Graham's works. And what's she going to do? Come out of her grave and yell at us, And so they finally realized that was kind of silly. So they did. They put on a one-night performance celebrating Martha Graham's works and honoring her. And, this performance was only by word of mouth. There was very little advertisement of it. And the night of the concert, there were, if you've ever seen a New York City block, it's very long. There were people in line down this block, up this block, over to that block. I mean, most of them could not even get in. But they honored her work and her choreography. And as I said, to this day, her company still exists and they still do her works. But it's a company where they just do Martha Graham dances. That's it. Okay? And the school's still open. Do you know that Madonna once wanted to be a professional dancer and she trained at the Graham School, Martha Graham School? Okay, let's see. Okay, chapter 25, the last one. Doris Humphrey. Doris Humphrey was 1 year younger than Martha Graham. And they were both very, very much interested in modern dance. And Doris Humphrey had ballet training, and she actually was a beautiful dancer. And she went and auditioned for Ruth St. Denis Company, and she got hired right away. So she was one of the 3 people, remember, that left, okay? And she left with another dancer whose name was Charles Weidman, okay? Weidman. And now, even though 3 of them left, they weren't going to do something together. Martha Graham was going on her own path, right? But Doris Humphrey and Weidman, Charles Weidman, decided to start their own company. And they did that. And initially, their company was called the Humphrey Weidman Dance Company. But you know what happened was it was just a timing thing. You know, the public and other artists at that time were really into serious modern dance. And so, you know, Charles Weidman was more of a comedic choreographer. And the audience, they were not liking his works that much, you know. And so he decided to leave. But don't worry, because he found his place. He started choreographing for operas and for plays and Broadway, and he found his place. So he worked out quite well. Now, Doris Humphrey kept the company, but now called it the Doris Humphrey Dance Company, and continued to do her works. And she, you know, her style of choreography reflects a very dignified, caring personality. She was a very lovely human being, very kind, very nice. And she got to the point too, it wasn't just the money when she was with Denishon, but it was getting tired of this sacred style of dance, you know, that style of dance. So she started doing exercises and choreographing in her way of moving. And so her choreography has a name, and her style is called Fall and Recover. And that is because she loved the idea of falling and recovering oneself. You know, like say you're about to fall off the curb or something, you don't see it coming. Well, you don't stop and your brain says to you, hey, watch out, you're about to fall. You know, you just, you fall, but then your body somehow gets you back up, and you don't stop and think, oh, I'm falling, I must put my hand down and push myself up. You know, it's just natural. And she just loved that idea. And she also loved the idea of, you know, falling and recovering emotionally, in every regard, mentally. She just loved that idea. So her choreography is full of, you know, she would dance and do a step where she was balancing, and she purposely would not do something else. And she would see where she was going to naturally fall. Like, let's say she does something like this, and she just waits and waits and waits to see where her body's going to fall and where her body takes her naturally. And then that would turn into something else, and she would tilt over and see where that would take her. So her style is very flowy and very moving, and it's called Fall and Recovery, okay? Hey, my doggies, where are you? Okay, managing the technique. Arlene's going to do a little bit more work. Okay, Arlene has to do some work, and then I'll take you for a walk. Okay? I'm almost done. I have to do a little more work. Almost done. Okay, so fall and recovery with Doris Humphrey. You know, I'm going to read something to you that she said, and I quote. Let's see, where is it? I want my choreography to show the nobility of the human spirit and the love and grace for the fallen man. Very caring personality. All right, so she continues to choreograph. Now, it's no secret to her about the great Martha Graham. In fact, Martha Graham and Doris Humphrey were often pitted against each other. And they both taught at Bennington College one summer, teaching master classes. And they were both very much aware of the rivalry, but Doris Humphrey was very quiet and just tried to, you know, stay low key, etc. So don't really know how they felt about each other personally. All right, so let's see. She continues working, and then, you know, kind of early in her life, she develops arthritis, and then it turns into rheumatoid arthritis, and she's getting worse and worse and worse. So she had a musician friend who played the piano for her, and her name was Pauline Lawrence, and she was a musician. And Pauline Lawrence's husband was Jose Limon. Jose Limon. Now, Doris Humphrey did not know him. He wasn't famous yet. But Pauline Lawrence told her that he was a dancer, and when he got out of the military, he wanted to take up his dancing again. And so it was just about that time that Jose Limon got out of the military and, you know, came home, and they met and started dancing with Doris Humphrey's company. Now, he was married to Pauline Lawrence, so they didn't fall in love or anything. And so he was just an incredibly beautiful dancer. All right, so now Doris Humphrey starts getting worse and worse, and she, you know, starts using Jose Limon to choreograph on, like she's using his body instead of her own to choreograph things and stuff like that. And later on, when she's ready to retire, she wants Jose Limon to take over as director of the company, and she wants him to change the name to Jose Limon Dance Company. And he says, no, you put all this together. There's no way I can do that. And so he kept it in her name, and she was basically the artistic advisor. Okay, so he starts taking over the company. And a few years later, when he started choreographing and showing a lot of his own works, then he changed it to the Jose Limon Dance Company. Now, Doris Humphrey, you know, she quietly got married and had a child. She did not have any kind of cult following like Martha Graham. She, I don't know, they were just so very different. And so, of course, it falls true that their choreography is very different as well. Not to say one's better than the other. I think they're both brilliant myself. But unfortunately, we do not have very much of Doris Humphrey's works left. And, you know, once again, she did not start a school. She should have, because that could have kept her company alive longer and kept feeding it. But the thing is, from the few works we have of Doris Humphrey, you can see her movement style in Jose Limon. I mean, it's incredible. You can see how he picked up her movement style. And of course, he added his own ways as well. But quite incredible, quite incredible. So let's see. Oh, I have to tell you this. She was a great artist. Listen to this. She said, I believe that variety is good, and that when variety is held in unity, it was the greatest of all genius. Listen to that. And she applied that to everything, not just dance. I mean, if you're in a classroom at Long Beach, look around at the cultures of all the different people, you know, and how we're all in one room. And she believed that variety is good, and that unity of this variety is what's genius. Isn't that incredible? And so she believed that in her choreography as well. So again, we have someone into spirituality and delving into many, many things that dance has brought her. Okay, now a lot of her works were lost. She didn't have a lot of money. She had an illness. And unfortunately, you know, we just don't have a lot of her works. One of her works that was saved, I don't think is a very good representation of her works anyway. She did a dance about a religious cult called the Shakers, and it's nothing like the way she usually moved. So I don't know why that one piece is held up in esteem as her great choreography, because it's nothing like her beautiful choreography. All right, guys, that's it for today. We are done. We are over. Just a reminder, your paper for the concert is due this coming Friday too. So you have some extra work this week. All right. Stay safe. Again, you do not have to turn in a hard copy. No, you don't. Just submit it through the computer like you usually do. All right. And I will see you next week. Bye-bye.